All right, welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, so thank you for joining us. This is our live series. This is something we've started doing recently and that we have full intention of just continuing to do this moving forward. So for now, we're planning on every Wednesday and Friday at between 1:30 and 2 p.m. We're going to talk about different things that will help you, grow your that's designed to help you be able to grow your home care agency. All right, so people that are watching, give me a quick thumbs up and let me know that you can hear me, and we can start. Go ahead and get started. All right. So let's see here. Okay. All right. So today our training is going to be on understanding deposit strategy. This is something that I actually have been asked about a lot over the last few months, and I get this asked by almost everyone at some point or another that's opening a home care agency. Do I have to do a deposit? What type of deposit do I need? Is it really something that needs to happen? The short answer is yes. Like especially if you are a newer agency, you really need to have some sort of a plan and a strategy that's going to involve that's going to involve your deposits. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so my name is Julio Briones. You have all those wonderful credentials at the end of my name, and I've dedicated the bulk of my career to helping out people, businesses train, and specifically in the home care space. I started my career out as a recruiter. I've done everything you can imagine. I've been a coordinator, a business developer, office manager. I've even helped create training programs for franchisors in the past, and everything that I have done has traditionally been geared towards business growth. Okay, so now one of the things that we are looking at is the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and that's kind of where the deposit strategy comes in. If you want to have that 1,000-mile journey in your business, you have to be able to take those first initial steps and get past that part that most people end up failing on. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we start out by understanding what is a deposit. Okay, a deposit is a sum that should be equal to about 2 weeks of service that people got to give you in order to cover expenses. Now, this is not their first 2 weeks of service. This is apart from this. This is a security deposit. It's no different than like when somebody goes to rent an apartment. They're just giving that money to hold on to. This money is collected to assure future payment, and it's also going to be used to pay any unpaid balance that you might have at the end of services. All right, so it's basically just to make sure that you're always getting paid. All right, so how do we move on from this? Well, let me go ahead and all right, so why are they so necessary? Well, a proper deposit strategy is going to do a couple of main things. Number one, it's going to minimize your payroll shortfalls. Look, it depends on, this is primarily for private pay, this deposit strategy. So this is where it becomes challenging, especially for newer home care owners. Agencies that have been around longer, they've got ways to mitigate these things, But newer agencies, especially, from what I have found, they tend to they have a tendency to not properly plan for long-term expenses. A lot of agencies they kind of just wing it, and so even if you are properly planning for this, unless you're extremely well capitalized and money's just never going to be a concern to you, you really should have some sort of a deposit strategy. All right. So payroll shortfalls. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say, for argument's sake, that we are not taking a security deposit, and that we are just strictly working off of, we bill, we pay, we bill, we pay. So here's what happens. We start services today. All right. Next week we send out the first bill. It takes 2 to 3 days, even if you have the credit card on file. It might take a couple of days for the money to appear in your account, minus the processing fees for the credit card. If you're doing ACH and you're a newer company, it could take as much as 7 or 10 days, unless you're going to pay fees to get that money put in. Or where by the time the invoice gets physically mailed to the client, they sit there, remember to write out the check, and it gets physically mailed back to you. Again, you're looking at a number of days of turnaround. So if you are maintaining a 50% gross margin, all right, that means you only have half those funds, for caregiver pay, but you also have to pay your nurse for your start of care, depending on what state you're in. You also have to pay office staff. You also have to pay, your employer burden on payroll. And that's going to chew up, as much as 60-70% of the money that you're billing. And if these are your first few clients, it's going to chew up more than 100% of it. So the deposit is really intended to cover those initial costs, and then you replace it back as the money starts flowing in. This way you're always ahead of payroll. The other intent that for the deposit strategy is to mitigate any losses. So let's say you're taking care of a 24/7 client, and you're billing this client every week, $4,000 or $5,000 a week, $6,000 a week. So what will happen if the client suddenly dies? You still have this payroll. And what if they're paying you and you've covered services, and now you have 2-week backlog? Or what if the client runs out of money and they don't tell you, and now all of a sudden you're 2 or 3 weeks behind? See, a couple of things will happen. One, by the time you realize you're not getting paid, you can start ending the process to end services immediately, and the 2-week deposit will cover the bulk of it, if not all of the monies owed to you. The other big thing is if the client suddenly dies and you're going to count on the estate to pay you. Look, if anybody challenges that estate, it could take years before you get paid, if ever, and you still have operating costs to cover. So having the security deposit will give you the opportunity to not go into the negative. And also, if anybody has ever dealt with probate and estates, services are usually pretty low on the priority of who gets paid. So unless there's a large estate and zero debt, you might never see your money if somebody suddenly passes. The third thing is that if you have a proper strategy on how you're managing this, and what I mean by this is, if you have, in a perfect world, a separate account, completely separate account, or you have impeccable bookkeeping skills, and you're able to separate and show growth, consistent growth. Now, we always recommend a separate account in which you're consistently putting in, and if you are using it to cover expenses, any portion of it, that it gets replaced immediately. All right, and the reason we suggest this is because if you're ever going to seek out financing, or if you ever have a need to seek out a line of credit or some sort of SBA loan or anything along those lines, one of the things you're going to really want to be able to show is health and steady and continuous growth. So if you have your account for your deposits as a separate thing in the bank, and it's consistently growing, Now you have a provable track record to go to the bank with that will increase the likelihood of you getting some sort of financing. Again, there's a lot of factors involved in this, and none of this is supposed to be taken as financial advice because we are not financial planners, but this is just based on our experience of having worked with others using these strategies. These are the things that typically can be used. Okay, these are what typically works. So, how much do you ask for? Well, the formula is 1 hour or day, basically 1 unit of service, you should be asking for 2 units worth of deposit. So if you're doing hourly service and somebody wants, a total of 20 hours a week, you're going to ask for a deposit that's the equivalent of 40 hours. If somebody wants if you're doing live-in service and it's just going to be an ongoing live-in case, then that means you should be asking for a 2-week deposit of service before initiating services. All right, and as the client's needs grow, you're going to have to increase your deposit. Okay, so again, because this is the primary intent of this is to cover your costs in case of non-payment or sudden death. So if you are servicing a client that started out with 12 hours a week, and then all of a sudden they call you and say, oh my goodness, grandma broke her hip, and now we need 24/7 care, there's a significant difference in the amount of service hours. You're talking about 12 hours a week to 168 hours a week, and you're going to have to ask for a deposit that will match the difference. So how do you put a proper strategy in place? So now you have a clear understanding why you have the deposit, how much of a deposit you should be asking for, and a few ways to make this deposit work for you. So now you need to start to normalize and systematize your deposit strategy. All right, so the first thing that you're going to want is to include the language in your service agreement. Now, please consult some sort of professional, like a licensing consultant or an attorney or whoever does the checks and balances for your agency, to make sure that you are in compliance with your local, state, and federal administrative policies and laws. Okay, but the language for a deposit should be included in your service agreement. Something along the lines of a deposit of X amount of dollars needs to be given at the time of signing in order to initiate services. That's all. And then the language should also include as to what happens to the money. Like the money will be returned to the client. It'll be placed in a non-interest bearing account and returned to the client at the end of services, something along those lines. Some states allow for interest bearing for something like this, some don't. Again, please see a licensed professional that can help you with this. And you will also have to put in that upon death or upon satisfactory payment of the final bill, you can apply this deposit to that, or it'll be returned in full. Okay. Next, you need to make it part of the in-home process, not the focus of the in-home. Meaning that you're talking about your services, how you help. You're really honing in on some of the key things, like what the pain point is, what the cost of inaction is. You're talking to the decision maker. You're talking about how you fix their problems and make everything better for them overall, improve quality of life as well as quantity of life. And now it looks like they're gonna sign with you and say, okay, great, as part of our sign-on process, we need to have 2 weeks deposit based on the number of hours that we discussed, and we need this before we can initiate services. And that needs to be it. It's an afterthought, not really the bulk of the conversation. We suggest you bring it up after you have them agreeing to sign with you, because if you bring it up too early, then it becomes a focal point. You also need to train all of your staff to understand and to explain properly how to work with a deposit, all right, and how to implement your deposit strategy. If you have some policies and procedures that you can put in place for this, that would be ideal. All right, but everyone from the receptionist, your schedulers, and anyone who's going to be involved in the intake and sign-up process needs to be familiar with how all of this works. They need to be familiar with how to discuss the deposit. It needs to be a part of every step of the process. So if a client is calling for an intake, that needs to be part of the conversation. Yes, so our process is we set up an in-home, we meet mom and dad, because we understand that the in-home is not, that services are not just about the client, they are also about the caregiver's personality and how we can best match. Then once you've agreed to sign with services, we take a 2-week deposit, sign some paperwork, and we go ahead and get you started. All right, so that would be part of the intake process. We will also, so whoever's involved in that should know and be aware of how to do that. Whoever's involved in the client sign-up portion should be aware of how to do it as well, and how to successfully get all of these things in place. So in addition to training and informing your client-facing staff, you should make it part of your in-office training, and so that you role play and practice. Everyone has to be comfortable with the process, with the intake, with the in-home, with anything that involves day-to-day client-facing activities. Because if they're not comfortable, it's going to come off as uncomfortable, and that's going to open the door for people to either ask for some sort of exemption to the deposit or ask for some sort of a discount. And the person that's going may not know how to handle those objections very well, and it could cost you clients. It's all about building trust in the agency and trust within yourself. And that brings us to the final thing you have to keep in mind. Do not make an exemption at all. No exceptions, no exemptions. Everyone needs to be able to put this in. You're going to hear a lot, and I've seen this happen many times with even large agencies that have gotten into trouble over this. Oh, we don't take a deposit because we keep a credit card on file. We don't take a deposit because we have ACH. We only take 1 week deposit because we're taking, we have authorization. The client has long-term care insurance and they insist on, us taking assignment of benefits and not giving a deposit. I'm going to tell you, just as a general rule, again, from what we talked about previously, if you have an issue where the client is insistent on this, you're better off walking away from the client. Simply because, let's take this one point at a time. ACH authorization can be pulled in minutes. All they have to do is call the bank and you will not be able to pull that money. Credit card claims can be disputed very easily. All right, and in the general climate that we have had in the last few years in this country, they will tend to side with the client rather than with you. And yes, in the end, you may get your money, but you still have to make payroll in between and have a whole lot of other expenses that are associated with your business to pay. And especially if you are a newer agency or a younger agency that doesn't really have the volume to cover losses like this, it can get you in trouble very quickly. Long-term care, there's a lot of nuances when it comes to working with long-term care insurance, and we'll save that for another video or another training session in the future. But it's not as cut and dry as you may think. This is not one of these things where, oh, they have long-term care insurance and I'm definitely going to get paid. Remember a couple of things. There are limits to policies. There are limits that you may not be aware of, and there are nuances on what is required to get paid or what is not. And you're dealing with insurance. They're always going to try to find some reason not to pay you. All right. So if if you enjoyed this training, please leave us a comment below, share this video, let others take advantage, and let other people learn from this. All right. We appreciate the support. We appreciate any support and help that you can give us. And if you are interested in services, whether it be training, mentorship, audits for your recruitment, retention, or inter-office policies, you can find us on the web at thebrionesgroup.com. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time.